Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Laura and I own a business named Designs Laura. The purpose of this video is to do a brief overview of what can and some of what cannot be sold on Etsy. Johnny Cajun Roots Reseller is going to let me come on his shows starting a week from Friday, not tomorrow but the following Friday, and do my best to answer questions. I know the basics of Etsy and I know enough to stay out of trouble. I don't push the boundaries, and there are some boundaries with what can and cannot be sold. So the three main categories are handmade, vintage, craft supply. But there are some overlaps that turn into gray areas. What happens when your necklace falls off the table? Your prop falls. What happens when handmade, an item could be handmade or vintage, or it could be a craft supply and vintage, or there is even cases where all three overlap? What do you do? I kind of already know some of the answers because I've asked Etsy in the past. I'm going to need this little prop, so excuse me, I'm sorry. In the past, I like to support handmade people. I also like to support people who sell supplies on Etsy. So I purchased these handmade wire wrapped little supply. It's a supply because it's not a finished product and it's not vintage. This was a craft supply. So I purchased about a dozen of these, and after they arrived, I started to think, what happens if I use somebody else's item in my handmade earrings? And so I messaged Etsy. Now I've been on there since 2012, so this was probably 8 years ago. They told me that I would have to go with a production partner. I would have to list that person, and it was an individual person. It was not a manufacturing company, in my shop as a production partner. And then I was also going to have to be transparent in, does she use child labor? Is she following all the local laws? I mean, there is so much involved in a production partner. I just said, okay, I thank you for the information, and I did not sell these on Etsy. I have 4 of them left. I sold them when I went to craft fairs. So those gray areas can really trip a person up. Now, today I started a chat with Etsy because I needed to answer before I did this video. And I typed out my questions, and the first one I asked them was, can a handmade pair of earrings be sold by a reseller in the vintage category if they were made more than 20 years ago? She could not answer the question, which is a worrying point for me because she is going to get in contact with a specialist who will email me back their answer. The thing is that gray area is not one I want to get close to the edge, because one person could come up with an answer. Let's say you get into trouble, gives you the go ahead, you get into trouble, your listing gets taken down, and they decide, no, you can't do that. I would save anything you get from Etsy in writing. Just say, well, this is why I did it. Hopefully that will get you out of trouble with Etsy, because 3 strikes with Etsy and you are permanently out. And I don't want to push those boundaries. The other question that she could not give me an answer to was, can a maker, and a maker is the handmade category, purchase a handmade supply like I did and use it as an ingredient in an earring? Now, I asked this question before, years ago, and I am curious to find out now if I get the same answer. I'm not going to push the boundary, but I think a lot of people are going to want to know the answer to that. I didn't get much. I'm hoping when the specialist gets back to me that I get to ask one more question where the categories overlap, and it was, can a vintage bead be sold as a craft supply? And then also I wanted to tell you, I've been reading the manual so that I can get a little bit out of what I usually do and give you good answers. Be careful using the descriptive term dead stock when selling vintage. Etsy can come back to you after you list it. They'll take your listing down and then they will ask you the question. You have to prove that it's actually dead stock. Another thing that is in the manual under what can and cannot be sold was, I make spoon rings from vintage silverware. Now, vintage silverware is not considered a supply. Oh, this is so complicated. A supply's definition was it has to be inherently used. Its main purpose was to be put into a craft. Silverware's main purpose is for us to dine with. So it's not considered a supply. But I did make it. Now let's say I keel over tomorrow, and I've made all of my stock's been made within the last year or two. Can somebody else buy out my inventory and sell it on Etsy as handmade? No, because you cannot be a reseller in the handmade category. If you buy something that somebody else made, you cannot resell it in the handmade category. We don't know yet. We haven't gotten the answer. If it's more than 20 years ago, can it be sold as a vintage item? What about art? Is art considered in the handmade category and someone passes on? So these are the things I'm hoping that the specialist and I can have a back and forth email. And at the end, I will ask him how much of it, if I can post some of the answers or not, because Etsy has privacy rules that I can't, I don't make the rules, but I don't want to break them either. So I'm going to be asking these questions. If you guys have a gray area question that you would like me to ask, please put that down in the description, the description of this video, and I will do my best. I'm hoping to get someone I can have a back and forth with. I was honest. I told them I'm not asking for myself. I'm asking for a group of people who are wanting to learn more about Etsy. So this could turn into maybe somebody would come on Johnny's show and even answer some of our questions. So that would be fantastic. I don't like to push the boundaries. So one of the items that I have on Etsy for the least, I think I've been selling this the whole 12 years, is I make a supply. It's this little magnet, and I know you're not going to be able to see it. I don't think it's that important. It's this little magnet that has a lobster claw on one end and a loop. What this does is people who make necklaces can purchase this and use this as their clasp. But now they're going to have an issue, like I did. I'm not, if I ever saw an Etsy person using my supply, I will just smile and move along, because my philosophy is once you buy it from me, what you do with it is your business. If you run over it with your car, I really don't care. Just don't use my pictures and don't use my description. And I really don't want to be listed as a production partner, to be really honest. But I have sold so many of these. No one's ever, I don't make a deal of it. No, I'm not going to report anybody. It's not my business. But a person who is older or has arthritis might also purchase this from me and put it on their own necklace that they own, that they don't plan to resell. They might just add it to their own necklace. They're the end user. They're not going to resell it. So I was a little dangerous listing this as a supply, because if you put something up as a supply, it cannot be something that the end user can just buy and use. It needs to have something done to it. I found this very surprising when I was reading the manual in preparation for this, that blank sweatshirts, blank t-shirts, and I had to read it 3 times to make sure I didn't read it wrong. This is another question I would like to ask if the special technician does actually email me. It said that they cannot be sold on Etsy because inherently they are to be worn. They are not inherently a craft supply. But when you search on Etsy, I thought, oh, I know I'm going to find some. I was absolutely shocked at how many I found. Blank sweatshirts, blank t-shirts. And they even say, they're a craft supply. So just because somebody else is doing it does not mean that it is permitted. Don't rely, like if you're wondering if you can sell Mickey Mouse, newly made Mickey Mouse blanket, and you go on Etsy and you search, that is not adequate research to find out if your item is legal on Etsy, because they're all over the place. And you cannot sell anybody else's proprietary, what they own. And Mickey Mouse is owned by somebody else. So you cannot make something new, Mickey Mouse, and sell it unless you've gotten permission from Walt Disney to do that. But it's all over the place. That is like a whole nother conversation, and people get really upset when you talk about it. So I do kind of stay away from it and just mind my own business. So the absolute basics, again, of what can be sold. If you have contemporary jewelry that it's a brand name, like I don't know if you go to Maurice's, or I don't even know what all they are because I'm so into the handmade, like Maurice's or Claire's. You have to, Etsy can ask you to prove that it's actually more than 20 years old. So if you have contemporary jewelry, that cannot be sold on Etsy. And another gray area is, what if it's broken and people want to use it in their crafts? Inherently, it wasn't used to be a craft supply. So if I go by their definition, it can't. I would recommend, if you're someone who sells a lot of broken jewelry to crafters, and you have like something that getting an answer to that question is something that you would be selling over and over and over, like I did with this item, because I sold it over and over. To me, it was valuable to get a specific answer of what I can do with this. I recommend getting in contact with Etsy in a way that they will put it in writing, the answer to your questions. Yes, you are permitted to sell broken jewelry. Yes, you are permitted to sell blank t-shirts. That would be my recommendation. I can't tell you everything that can and cannot be sold on Etsy. So remember, the main categories are handmade, vintage, craft, supply. It must be something inherently used in crafts. And there's a lot of upcycling and repurposing going on right now. So if you had a new contemporary set of silverware that was produced 5 years ago, you cannot sell that on Etsy because it is not inherently a craft supply. If you have a vintage set of silverware that is more than 20 years old, and I did forget to say, vintage, Etsy has their own definition of vintage. It must be 20 years old. You can sell vintage silverware. Handmade, Etsy has their own definition of handmade. It must be made by the shop owner. If you have people who help you run your shop, you must list them in your shop. There's the owner, and there's a place to list everybody and what they do, their name, what they do, and some kind of a picture or icon. The owner of the shop must be involved at the minimum. You must be involved in the design of the product, and you must be the one who's, if you're going to have your neighbor come over and do the knitting, you must be designing the project, and you must be purchasing the materials. Your neighbor cannot knit her own Afghan and then you sell it for her. If you get caught, you can't do it. Not my business. I don't go reporting people. I just mind my own business. But their other part that Etsy has another subcategory of handmade where you can use a production partner. That the shop owner must come up with a unique design, and Etsy gets to decide if it's unique enough. Then let's say you're going to design a t-shirt. This is a very popular production partner. It's a design that's going to be printed on clothing. You would need to find who your production partner, who your printer is going to be, and you have to list who they are, where they are, what they do. You're also, Etsy holds you responsible for making sure that that company follows all the laws where they are. If they're in another country, or actually Etsy has their rules about child labor, discrimination policies. There is a lot, and that's actually why I just decided, I don't know how I would ever use a production partner anywhere. I'm not really interested. I love what I already do, but that is such, you don't really have control over what that company is doing, but Etsy holds you responsible. Also, if that company ships that shirt out, let's say at Christmas time they're really backed up, you'll get bad feedback. You could get chargebacks, and it doesn't matter if it was the company's fault. You are responsible. And some people have like a block there. They don't think that they can't quite get that concept. You are responsible. Even if the company goes out of business and never sends the items, unfortunately, you are responsible. Tracking numbers are your friend there. You do need to be checking on that every day. So this is just an oversight to get the conversation, get your brain thinking of what questions you want to bring on Fridays regarding Etsy. I'm not an expert. I do know how to get to the manual, and hopefully I'll have a running conversation with this specialist that they're going to get me in touch with. But if you already have a shop, if you've already been able to open a shop, I did go and look. Now, I opened mine 12 years ago, so the steps to opening a shop have changed dramatically. And I noticed that the second step of the 4 steps was list something. Well, you need to know what you're going to list. So you make sure that if you're in that process of listing, make sure that the first listing is Etsy legal. Etsy is hard, and it can be very confusing, the fact that they want you to list something, the second step of the 4. And to understand all their rules, I don't think that it's realistic for anyone to think that someone new to Etsy, or even someone who's seasoned, to understand everything that can or cannot be sold. So if we can work as a community and help each other out in a kind way, I think that's going to be a really positive thing. I've already learned more things that I didn't really, because I stay in the middle, I stay in the safe zone. Now I'm kind of spreading out to the edges where things are overlapping, and I'm going to learn more stuff. So anyway, I just wanted to get this video out. Johnny is telling me that people have a long list of questions, and I want to be ready for you as much as I can. If I don't know the answer, I'll do some research and see what I can find out. Okay, so everyone, here it's Thursday, but my kids are out of school, so it feels like weekend. Have a happy Friday tomorrow, great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.